Well, welcome to this lecture sponsored by the Institute of World Politics. And I'm Ambassador Aldona Vosch, and I'm the president here at IWP. So for those of you who are new to IWP, we are a graduate school of international affairs, national security, and intelligence. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degree programs, and 18 graduate certificates. If you are interested to find out more about IWP or study at IWP, then please make sure that you speak after our lecture with one of our staff, and if you'd like to raise your hands so you know who works here, you can identify easily. I would like to thank all our supporters who make IWP possible and make this event possible, and especially today's sponsor, Philip Linderman. So thank you very much for the support. Now today, we are hearing from the United States Ambassador Gordon Sondland, who will deliver a lecture entitled The Intelligence Customer. What do we, as the customers, want from the intelligence community? Ambassador Gordon Sondland was appointed by President Donald Trump in 2018 and served as the 20th United States Ambassador to the European Union until February of 2020. During his distinguished tenure, Ambassador Sondland oversaw a diverse portfolio covering trade, energy, national security, defense, as well as agriculture. Now, beyond diplomacy, Ambassador Sondland is a trailblazer in the hospitality industry. He's the founding Providence Hotels since 2001. Now, the brand now is part of Pyramid Global Hospitality and operates over 14 uniquely designed properties in prime United States metropolitan markets and garnering acclaim from publications such as the New York Times and Condé Nast. Ambassador Sondland's commitment extends way beyond into community service, which includes roles on Oregon Governor Kulonogowski's transition team, and therefore contributing to the growth of Oregon's film and television industry, and leadership positions in philanthropy. As a philanthropist, he co-founded the Gordon D. Sondland and Catherine J. Durant Foundation in 1993, dedicated to initiatives supporting families and communities. Recently, Ambassador Sondland joined the board of directors of AHLA, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, which is starting January of 2022. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Gordon Sondland, my colleague. Please welcome to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Aldona, Ambassador Vosch. I can tell you that becoming an ambassador is truly an honor, and it tends to blow up your ego to the point of where, when I first took the oath, my then spouse said, "Do I have to call you ambassador from now on?" And I said, "I think you do." And she said, "Well, Mr. Ambassador, would you please take out the fucking garbage?" So I was taken down a peg right there. And I felt as an ambassador like I was taking out the garbage on many days, let me tell you. It's an honor to be here. IWP is an amazing place and could not be led by someone more qualified and charming and effective than Ambassador Vosch. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
To go into my prepared remarks, which I'll do in a moment, I want to emphasize that as a consumer of intelligence, what's provided to me is really critical. And when I get intelligence that I could have read in the New York Times that's marked with all kinds of sexy red lines, and I'm sitting in a locked skiff with handcuffs on a briefcase and all of the James Bond stuff, it's really disheartening to think that we go through all of those machinations to produce what's called intelligence, things that are really in the public domain. And I think there's a lot of show business going on when there should be substance going on. And I'm going to talk about something that I've given a great deal of thought to since serving as the ambassador to the European Union. And that's the working relationship between the intelligence community and the chiefs of mission. As an ambassador and a political appointee in Brussels, I was a constant consumer of intelligence. Some of what I received was invaluable. It was, without a doubt, it helped us make big economic decisions and other changes that the president was determined to see through in Europe. But most of what I received fell into the categories of don't really need to know, not relevant to me, or just not fast enough to make an impact. And that's because the whole intelligence system seems to run on its own momentum and often without taking the real-time needs of the people making the policy decisions into consideration. Frequent interactions between the chief of mission and the intelligence community would not only change that, but make for far more productive interactions, which produces better intelligence with bigger impact. 30 years ago, Ambassador Richard Haass said, "You in the intelligence community must not produce literature. You must produce results. And in order to produce results, you must get closer to the policymakers." He was spot on then, and it's still the right advice. Today, I'm going to give you some examples of issues and challenges I encountered as ambassador. Listen, I'm in no way criticizing the intelligence community or the patriotism of the women and men who serve in intelligence, many of whom risk their lives every day. What I want to do is share with you my time as chief of mission and what it looked like, because many of you are the future leaders in the intelligence community. And you're the change makers who will have the power to fix the system. And it must be fixed. In the intelligence community, especially with regard to ambassadors, there's long been a default setting, and that is you don't share anything with anyone. I haven't been in the game for decades, but I did pay close attention, and many intel veterans expressed the same frustration that I experienced. Intelligence isn't shared fast enough, and most of the time, it's not what we need. Yet, intelligence is discovered, picked apart, analyzed, and shared to help policymakers. To achieve that end goal, the curtains must be opened, the wall must be lowered, and intelligence professionals need to see ambassadors as fully trustworthy, always working with the same ultimate goals in mind. And ambassadors, in turn, to be fair, need to trust the intelligence community. The challenge for the ambassador is that even if there is trust, he or she continuously encounters barriers, keeping us from clearly communicating with intelligence collectors about what we need now, not at some point in the future. Many of the restrictions in place are a direct result of Washington trying to make sure that the lack of intelligence coordination that allowed 9/11 to happen doesn't happen again. But we must learn from the past that hoarding information is not always beneficial to our national security. What I'm saying about getting the right information into the right hands isn't new. I'm singing the same song that's been crooned for decades by people both in intelligence and diplomacy. Douglas McEachen, a senior CIA officer, made an analogy 30 years ago that many ambassadors, of course, have enthusiastically quoted since. The intelligence community must think of policymakers as football coaches, in need of specialized assistance that only scouts working on their behalf can provide. On the heels of McEachen, a policy official at the CIA Center for the Study of Intelligence event recalled being sent the story of the week's events. And he replied, "I am the story. Please tell me what I don't know." And that's exactly what a football coach is asking their scouts to do. And that's exactly what an ambassador is asking their intelligence team to do. So the big question is, why has there been so little change in the way we work together to make these sorts of exchanges happen and happen fast? It's been 30 years since McEachen made that football analogy, and it remains extremely relevant. The reality is this: there hasn't been significant change because the intelligence community continues to fear it. Why? So what if we work a little closer, a little faster, with more direction, with a bit more sharing of the right information? Will the wheels stop turning? Of course not. They're still going to do their very important jobs. They're just going to do them a little differently. That means the formula of "I'll tell you what I think you need to know" must go. The intelligence vis-a-vis diplomacy culture must change. Because the bigger question is, what's the whole point of the process? What's the whole point of the process unless it advances the policymaker's mission? Intelligence is used to help policy and to anticipate crisis. And if it doesn't impact the policymaker's job in a holistic way to find strategies, make policy, change policy, figure out why a counterparty is acting in a specific way, if it doesn't do that, why have it? We can't leave this system alone as it is. Left alone, it really does fail to live up to its potential. Every week, chiefs of mission are given reading to do. All of it selected by the intel team. They come in with a briefing and say, "You should read this and that." So every week, there I am, reading about issues that are important and sound exciting, but the information in front of me will not move the needle on what I'm actually trying to accomplish. So, why did this same "could be learned by reading the New York Times" level intelligence keep landing on my desk? Because the system has not kept pace with the way we negotiate. Because these curtains are still drawn between the diplomatic and intelligence communities. Because people are hesitant to open them. In the intelligence community, like in any bureaucracy, saying yes is always scarier than saying no. Restricting information is protecting oneself. But we need to protect America first. Our national security, our economic advancement, our power to leverage, and our strong diplomatic relationships all depend on changing the way we work together. Could I have said this while serving as ambassador? Honestly, no, but now with 2020 hindsight, I think I have some insight on how to implement change and make it stick. What I'm about to tell you might violate a lot of norms, but the system does require significant overhaul. I believe there are 4 main factors that must be considered for the ambassador-intelligence team relationship to work well, and they are as follows. Number 1, speed and agility. There is a deep, urgent need for real-time intel exchange. The system needs to be more agile, because as the chief of mission, you have to move with fast tactical information. The system is fossilized, and all the requirements go through an assistant in Washington and then into the field, and there must be a cooperative team in the ambassador's intelligence community to redeploy existing assets or focus on what helps them with their job, not on what the intelligence team thinks is important. And it all needs to happen fast. The second is trust. Ambassadors need to see the whole picture. The intelligence we receive from Langley and from the officers in our country cannot be watered down. The intelligence team must feel comfortable sharing sensitive information, or the ambassador will not be able to effectively advance the president's agenda. The third point, closer working relationship between the intelligence team and the ambassador. The chief of mission needs to make it known that he or she will go to bat at the highest levels to have the intelligence team's time covered. As in, they are spending their time on this issue because I asked them to, and I will make my superiors and their superiors aware of that. And the fourth point, the intelligence community must work without political bias. This means adhering to their apolitical mandate and nonpartisan professional norms. They must analyze with an open mind, deconstruct the issue, and never let political leanings influence work. It does not matter who the president is or if you agree with them on every issue. We all proudly work for America, and the president, whoever he or she is, sets our agenda. Let's start off with a look back at something that went very right for a change with the help of timely, and I mean hour-by-hour intelligence. I worked with our U.S. Trade Representative, Bob Lighthizer, on a critical trade issue in Europe, and here is where the intelligence community was able to shine. Together, we were able to identify a trading partner who was willing to circumvent their own government and deal directly with the United States for fear that the U.S. would retaliate with sanctions. Had we not had actionable intelligence, we might not have approached the trading partner in question, but with fast, and I mean minute by minute, hour by hour intelligence, we discovered a rift between that trading partner and their government. The actionable intelligence we received was what really helped us decide our tactics, and the intelligence was spot on. If hypothetically the intel had shown that the partner would have never considered our approach, we probably would have used a different tactic. Because here's the thing that needs to be remembered every day. An intelligence team is working for a chief of mission. Many times there is only one chance to bite the apple. You can't approach things one way and then another. It really makes you look weak. In this case, the intel we received was perfect. It corroborated what we already suspected. We shot our shot and we got a slam dunk. I bring this up not just because it was a big win for America and American workers, but it illuminates the need for real-time intelligence. Here's the way we work and negotiate today. Fast or faster? Those are the only two choices. That's why we need our political and economic objectives to drive intel collection and not the other way around. We need our political and economic objectives to drive intel collection, not the other way around. As ambassador, one focuses on their area of responsibility. If you're in the EU, it's probably the EU as an institution, but it's also EU countries and any multilateral issues. It's one thing to have a fossilized system doing its thing, but the ambassador on the ground has to have the flexibility to tell their chief of mission, I don't care what Langley is doing. I need this in days, hours. The intelligence community needs to be open to such a request. When I entered the post in Brussels, I got a big fat briefing book with all sorts of tabs for the EU countries, the Commission, the Council, and it was all someone at State Department's thoughts on the issues of the day. But the question is, by the time it got to me, was it relevant? Our needs shift in real time. They move far more quickly than the system allows, from generation to recruiting, and to delivering the final intel product. We're not talking about wartime intel here, but just the fact that most political appointees have close personal ties with senior administration officials, including the president, means they may be tasked with things the intel community doesn't even know about. As Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. But as an ambassador, you're getting punched in the mouth every day. How do you deal with those punches? I'll tell you how. The chief of station needs more agility to redirect resources to answer the ambassador's immediate tactical needs. This need for speed isn't just because we all work fast now. The need is really linked to power. And for ambassadors, that power is tied to our ability to leverage. I know, I shouldn't say that in mixed company. Leverage is a dirty word in the intelligence community. But let's cut through the bullshit. Leverage is the key to everything. And how it's deployed, that is the art. That is the true art of diplomacy. For us, leverage comes in many forms. It could be knowledge of hypocrisy, or what a country or government official wants is not what they're doing themselves. Sometimes it's of a far more sinister nature. But whatever it looks like, leverage is key. Without exposing sources or methods, using leverage in diplomacy is the art, not the science. It's how we reduce dangers and seize opportunities for America. It's very often our best weapon. With that in mind, the intel community should give us what we ask for, even if they don't think it's the ace in our pocket. As Ambassador Paul Wolfowitz said, the more factual, the better. Explain what is known and how it is known, and let the judgment flow from the evidence. The perfect evidence to policymaker pipeline happened for me around my 2019 trip to Ukraine, which I'm sure no one's ever heard of. It's no secret that the US is collecting intelligence about the Russians, but the intel reports aren't all equal. For this trip, because of great collection, we were able to understand that what the Russians feared the most was a strong alliance between the US and the EU on Ukraine. No daylight. We realized that a joint show of force would be an FU to Russia. That intelligence prompted me and Jean-Christophe Belliard, the former EU Deputy Secretary General, and a few others, to go to Odessa to show Russia that we were 100% behind Ukraine. It worked. Subsequent collections showed that there was real impact from that show of power. The Russians were so pissed that we were there together. In fact, they were so ticked off that I had to have some extra security in Brussels for a while. This example of strong intelligence delivered in real time brings us to our need to see the whole picture. We need to see the whole picture, and trust is critical. The intelligence we receive from the officers of our country cannot be watered down. It was not the case of Ukraine. We were able to send the exact message we wanted to the Russians with our show of power. To bring it back to Wolfowitz, he rightly said, the notion that the opinions of analysts should be the main product when often they are not a useful product at all is a recipe for having the analysis ignored in the first place. I don't think he meant to be harsh, but the reality is if you keep the ambassador in the dark, they will pick up on it and will strain the relationship. If you think that chief is going to compromise information, of course, go through the proper channels and report them. But know that most ambassadors are focused on accomplishing something tangible on their watch. No chief of mission wants to jeopardize anyone's safety, and we will always bear responsibility for our decisions. What I wanted to know while in Brussels was enough about an asset so I could assess if what they were bringing back was valuable. But there were setbacks to this, from being able to see the whole picture, like, for example, overclassification of information. What do I mean by overclassification? Let's go back to the 90s when President George Bush spoke frequently about his dislike for broccoli. So frequently that George H.W. Bush Broccoli Comments has its own Wikipedia page now. His distaste was commonly known, but if a Chinese spy had marked that information as classified, it couldn't be used because it would be revealing a source by virtue of how it got entered into the system. This is an extreme example, but this happens in the US often. During my time in Europe, all the people in my inner orbit had TSSCI clearances, but if rather generic info had been overly classified, I was restricted from reaching out to those outside my orbit, business people, for example, to ask, what do you think about this or that? Why does this happen? Because in the intelligence community, you're always competing against your peers for higher classification. You want to recruit the most sensitive information, which will be classified higher. But sometimes that's wrong. I believe in incentivizing the collection of information, not just classified information, but intelligence that answers a policymaker's specific request. That model exists in counterterrorism, in war zones, but it's one that needs to be employed more often. People need to be incentivized, and it will promote faster and more targeted collection. So how do we start working this way? What will build the intelligence team's confidence in an ambassador? First of all, strong personal relationships. It's not rocket science, but it's not really the culture we have in place. There are a lot of capabilities in the intelligence community, meaning financial, but interpersonal relationships will always reign. What some ambassadors forget when we gripe that we're not getting the whole picture, just as I'm doing today, is that the intelligence team needs to know that the ambassador is going to support them. Appointed ambassadors come from the private sector where quick tactical meetings are frequent. We want to work that way in government too. We want to seek the intelligence community out, and we want to be sought out as well. For the intelligence team, there should be far more than debriefing with their chief of mission. Ask your chief questions before they go into an important meeting. Ask him or her, what do you want to know? What fills in holes for you? The chief of mission, by the way, is always delighted to help collect. There's a lot of protocol walls up, and if there's a chief of mission who wants to keep them up, there's nothing anyone can do. But the intelligence community needs to create direct engagement opportunities. The message should be, we want to know what you're trying to accomplish, and we want to help you accomplish that. So how are those best results created? With what we've touched on already, and always with work done free from political bias. Intelligence analysts must produce work that comes from research, not influenced by political personal leanings. That is, of course, inference and deduction in intelligence work, but it all needs to be done with neutrality. And that's so important because anytime bias impacts intelligence, the overall trust in the profession breaks down. That analyst's bias does not impact just one chief of mission, one meeting, or one policy, but the entire system. I saw this on a high level when I was ambassador in regards to the JCPOA agreement with Iran. President Trump happens to be a person who feels the tick of the clock. When he was in office, he wanted to close as many deals as possible, which is why he often chopped out the niceties and got straight to the point. That included pulling out of the JCPOA. President Trump had a different view on JCPOA than his predecessor. It was not a wrong view, it was a different one. He said the best way to deal with the Iranians is to squeeze their cash flow. That's the plan, and that's the plan you need to support. The people of America as a package supported this president. And we should always, and what should always happen with those working to advance American interests is if you can't support your president in good conscience, you should resign. There were those on the Hill who were highly supportive of the JCPOA because it was put into place by the previous administration. Their argument was that it would slow down Iran's enrichment, that Iran would proliferate from a lower baseline with future activities impeded while also giving us significant surveillance access. The argument, and why the president wanted to withdraw, was that it was a flawed agreement from the beginning. It gave the Iranians access to a lot of cash. And we all know you can't create mischief around the world without a lot of cash because mischief is not free. So it was a fig leaf to continue to enrich while giving them direct access to cash. And the president turned out, I think, to be right on both counts. He did not want to give the Iranians diplomatic cover under the noses of the IAEA and also get paid for it. So he said, let's strangle their cash flow. If you have their cash, the rest will follow. Some Europeans didn't agree, particularly France, and they created something called Instex, a bartering system to get around US sanctions. As ambassador to the EU, I badly needed intel on who was behind this Instex development, why they were doing it, and who stood to gain financially. Whoever was pushing Instex was pushing Iran to become a nuclear power, which meant that this person, company, or government had something big to gain. That's what I really needed. That's where I really needed the intel. With it, we could expose people or companies, in France in particular, who were getting rich from Iran. That decision would have been above my pay grade, but getting the knowledge was not. Yet I never got a full story. And that's because some people in the agency were probably supportive of the JCPOA. Without the intel in hand, at the time, I went to Federica Mogherini, who was the HR VP of the European Commission, which is the equivalent of the Secretary of State. She was strongly in favor of the JCPOA because she and John Kerry worked on it together. I said, Federica, let me make you a deal. I'm going to see if Langley will agree to get you read in on some stuff and will show you the error of your ways. She didn't want to be bothered. She didn't want the facts. She said, oh, we already know all that. And I countered with, well, if you know all of that, isn't that compelling enough to change course? She did not change course. But what if I had more to show her? What if I had known more? I don't like the what ifs, but I continue to ask them today because in that moment, it felt like I was purposefully being kept in the dark. I do believe that almost all of us work with the president's agenda in mind, but checks and balances are always a good idea. Today, you've kindly listened to my ideas, ones I firmly believe in. Working without political bias, developing personal relationships, working with speed, agility, and trust must exist to create the best relationship between a chief of mission and their intelligence team. Is that our reality today? It's not. Things must change now. Ambassadors have been saying it since the end of the Cold War. We've been dancing the same dance for a long time, and trust me, the moves are getting old. It's a polka instead of a TikTok dance. It's a diesel engine instead of an electric car. But of course, I have the luxury of looking at all of this in my rear view. It's a very privileged perspective. So let's talk about what I would have done as an ambassador now that I have this 2020 hindsight. Number one, if they had sent me back to the EU, one of my first meetings I would have would be with my station chief. I would say the political objectives of this administration are as follows, and you need to reallocate resources to accomplish these objectives. The low-grade things you can continue, but this is what I need in order to advance the president's agenda. Second, most importantly, I would have held many more informal meetings. You sort of tiptoe around the intel community because it's this dance that goes on. If you don't behave, they won't give you anything, and you won't know what they don't give you. Third, I would meet with the team on a regular basis to clearly lay out our current political agenda and priorities as expressed to me from the highest possible levels. Normally, this message might take some time to filter through the system if it did at all. So I would ask the team if the priorities I expressed were their priorities, what intelligence would they gather? Where would they gather it? And what resources would need to be reallocated to do so? Then I'd make it known that I would fully support them. I'd go to bat for them at the highest levels to obtain those resources. So, in conclusion, I believe that the work we did in Brussels, in Europe, and in Washington made a good and a real difference. Would I repeat everything I did just as I did it? Of course not. But I do know this. We must open the curtain between diplomacy and intelligence much wider so that future ambassadors have more productive relationships and we can all stop using that football analogy. If we put in the smart work, the fast work, the work that has a clear direction, we'll keep raising the bar of our already high standards and never compromise the good we want to accomplish for America. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Sondland, thank you for that very personal and very informative presentation.
My pleasure.
It brought back a lot. So thank you. We have an opportunity for questions. So perhaps, Carlos, you have the microphone. If you could be kind enough to raise your hands and then identify yourselves before your question.
Yeah, Ken Meyerberg. Do ambassadors get into the issue of beneficial ownership?
Ambassadors get dragged into every issue, but I never found that to be sort of the compelling problem. It's like fighting over IP, I guess, in the commercial world. Everyone had so-called equities in everything that was unearthed, that was collected. That never got to my level. What I was really complaining about was timeliness and applicability more than ownership or equities.
My name is Mason Stoffer. I'm a student here. You mentioned changing things so there are incentives for intelligence collectors to work on behalf of the ambassador and things like that. What would those incentives look like to you specifically?
Steak dinners. No, I mean, look, human beings are always driven by a carrot, even if it's an intangible carrot. It's just the way we are as animals. We tend to spend our time on things that produce the dopamine that makes us feel good. And so incentives need to be structured in a way, whether they're financial incentives, whether they're rank incentives, whether they're praise from the top, whether they're, future prospects for plum assignments. There needs to be a metric set so that when people wake up in the morning, they're sort of like the dog looking for the bone. We want the dog to look for the bone. And if the bone happens to be over here rather than over here, We want to point the dog in that direction and say, the bone is over there. Don't waste your time over here. We don't care. We don't need it. Go find the bone. If you find the bone, you get X. If you find 2 bones, you get more than X. If you find 3 bones, you get really more than X. So that's the thing we need to set up in the system. And it needs to be done in an institutional way so that people's thinking is oriented in that way all day long. It's not like a special contest that's held the 3rd week in March. It's 24/7, 365.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Elena Biketova. I'm a democracy fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, CPA. I'm from Ukraine. Thank you so much for all your remarks about Ukraine and everything. Just circling back to your question about the curtain between embassies and intelligence should be opened wider. How difficult has it become with the war in Ukraine? How difficult has become this particular work?
Well, I haven't been at post during the war in Ukraine, but I can imagine and speculate that there is so much collection going on right now that the analysts are probably way behind in producing high quality work because as things change in real time, the intelligence gets redirected. I think what I'm trying to say is that's during wartime when the situation on the ground warrants a continual reassessment and reallocation of gathering capabilities and so on. What I'm saying is during peacetime, during a normal missions work, that same amount of intelligence redirecting should be happening on a daily basis. In other words, someone in Langley in January can't set the agenda for the year because the agenda doesn't cooperate with what's going on the ground. And sometimes it's like trying to turn a super tanker on the ocean. You turn the wheel and it takes many minutes for the ship to start to turn. When in fact, what the ambassador needs, the ambassador is going to a meeting tomorrow, next week, in an hour. And it goes back to my earlier point about leverage. Why is leverage such a dirty word? Leverage is the key to everything because no one does anything out of the goodness of their heart. There is always leverage, even in personal relationships, in love, in whatever situation you want to use as an example. Leverage always plays a key role. And what I mean by that is when you know something that about the other person, about the other government, about the other entity, that could make them vulnerable in terms of exposing hypocrisy. Someone preaches, climate change, and they're fervent about their climate change, and then you see them get on their private jet all alone and burn tons and tons of carbon dioxide. All of a sudden you have some leverage when they're talking about their feeling about climate change. Well, do you mean like when you're in your jet and, So that's what needs to happen is leverage needs to be developed on everyone, our friends, our enemies, everyone. Because diplomacy is the art of being able to use that leverage in a way that may not necessarily confront or offend someone, but they know that you know, and it changes behavior, which is really what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time. My name is Shreya. I'm over at the Stimson Center working on their cyber program, cybersecurity and intelligence. I wanted to circle back to the conversation on incentives for analysts and the proximity between, or the ideal proximity between the policymaker and the customer and the intel analyst. What are the risks that you think, or in your experience, what are the risks of having too close of a relationship between the policymaker and the analyst? If, for instance, there's incentives that push analysts and collectors towards certain directions of digging for intelligence, do you think that could create or have adverse effects and risk politicizing the intelligence process too much to the point where the policymaker is almost playing an intelligence role?
It's a really good question. And I think the answer is, to go back to Wolfowitz's quote, it's about facts. A fact is a fact, no matter who gathered it, how it was gathered, or what incentive was tied to its collection. And in fact, I don't see any danger about as close as possible a relationship between the analyst and the policymakers, as long as the analyst is sticking to facts. The minute there's an incentive to slant the intel, as in the JCPOA example, if you're predisposed to saying, I like the JCPOA, I want it to remain in place, or I hate the JCPOA, I want it to be voided. If you're predisposed to one of those two outcomes, then your intel is likely to come in, ratifying your thought. Whereas if the intel is purely based on fact, there is a JCPOA in existence, the Iranians are doing the following under the JCPOA. They're complying with it here, they're not complying with it here. If they continue to not comply with it and you draw that line, where does it take them in a month, in a year, in 2 years? As long as you stick to facts and you stay out of predetermined outcomes, then you have the best intel possible. And that's really the key to this.
Ken Meyer, record again. The opposite of leverage is enticement, the most direct enticement being a bribe. Do ambassadors get involved in that?
No. The short answer is no.
Who does?
Well, our system is very well settled on the notion of bribery. And now you're getting into legal issues that I'm not, necessarily qualified to opine on. I can tell you that you don't need to bribe an adversary or an ally if you have great intelligence. Once facts are unveiled, they tend to influence the outcome without an exchange of anything further.
I think there's one more question
Right here?
Yes.
Sierra, I'm an intern on the Hill right now. So is there anything that you would say could be done on the policy side to encourage, more of this collaboration between state and intelligence?
That's a very good question as well. I think some legislation aimed at being a little bit more discerning about how things are classified, how long they remain classified, who gets to classify things, and what is the default setting if they're not classified, would help unlock a lot of things that currently are stuck in silos and create an enormous bureaucracy to oversee them when it's not necessary. You literally, I can't tell you how many times my station chief said, I want you to read some things in the skiff. And I would go into the skiff, and if you're a political appointee, you're not a career ambassador, these are all new things to you. You haven't been dealing with them for 20 or 30 years. So you're very impressed by all of the protocols and the markings and the acronyms and no foreign and this foreign and that foreign. And you read this stuff and you say, I read this in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. What the hell is top secret about this? And that really undermines the credibility of the entire system. Because when you do get something that's being collected, particularly by HUMINT, and it's truly the source and method of the collection makes the information valuable, accurate, actionable in terms of policy making, in terms of negotiating. If you have to look for a needle in a haystack because the haystack is full of New York Times stuff that's labeled top secret, it's a lot of work. and you get really frustrated, and what happens? You miss the really good stuff. So when someone leads me into a skiff and swings that big door shut and turns the wheel and the lights go on that it's top secret, and they open the Holy of Holies, and I'm reading this stuff in the file with 19 red lines on it, eyes only, I want it to be fucking interesting. I don't want it to be something I could read in the newspaper. Anything else?
There's a few things that you've outlined. One being the way the system, the process works in itself. The other potential problem, I think, was the incentives, perhaps different incentives, and the third one was the trust. Which one has the biggest leverage problem to be changed, you think?
The trust, without any question. There's a big, especially with political appointees, there's a big sort of we be here when you be gone. And I think what the intelligence community, particularly the senior officials in the intelligence community, who probably don't have the kind of access to the leaders of our country, whether it's the president, the vice president, the national security advisor, the key people at the White House who make the policy decisions. I think that by trusting their chief of mission, in the case of political appointees, and I'm not commenting on career because I don't know other than what I see, the political appointees, almost to a person, and I think Ambassador Bush would agree with this, have incredible access and have an incredible ability to say, you know what, I'm working with this person at the agency who's not the director and not the DDO, not someone that gets to the White House, but someone mid-level or upper mid-level. They are fantastic. They got me this information. It allowed me to do that. I don't think there's any better way of pushing someone's career ahead or getting someone the props that they want, or even more importantly, the resources reallocated to what they're working on, than having a chief of mission go in and go to bat. And I tried to do that whenever it was warranted.
One more.
On the same topic of trust, I know sometimes people complain about trust with ambassadors and stuff, not because of the ambassadors themselves, but simply because of the State Department's security standards, how State Department does not do polygraphs in INR and things like that. Do you have any thoughts on that side of the trust, more just security?
Well, I guess my response will be a little jaded. Again, there are always exceptions to the rule, and the minute I say this, someone will pounce and say, well, Ambassador so-and-so in 1983 went out and shot his mouth off in front of the media after receiving a top secret briefing. Okay, you can't ever avoid something like that. There's always going to be a bad apple in the bushel. But I would say my colleagues, people that I worked with, who all came from the private sector, wanted to serve their country, were fortunate enough to be appointed chief of mission to somewhere, went through excruciating amount of vetting to get there, polygraph or not, in terms of background information, shedding their businesses while they were serving, selling their stocks while they were serving. They went through handstands to become chief of mission. The last thing we're going to do, and I think you would agree, would be to compromise your country. Does something slip through the cracks? Of course it does, but it does with the careers as well, who are polygraphed. So I don't think that's a fair criticism. I think having the agency say, well, this is amateur hour, that guy was a used car dealer and now he's ambassador to whatever, I think they missed the point, and they missed something very important. They need to form an alliance with that used car dealer who can pick up the phone on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock and call the President of the United States in his bed and say, hey, first name, not Mr. President, I want you to know what I'm working on. This is big. It needs your focus and attention. Career people can't do that. And the intelligence community needs to recognize that. I'm actually an advocate for more political appointees, not less, because the subject matter expert in the mission is the DCM on down. The deal maker is the ambassador.
Then this will be our last question.
So you mentioned the reallocation of resources quite a few times throughout your presentation. How do you think the community can best reduce friction so that those things can withstand the problems from shifting so many resources?
Produce good shit. Seriously, produce actionable stuff. As the Richard Haas quote, I don't want literature. I want results. I mean, if you think about forget the chief of mission, if you think about what the average senior manager in a mission has coming in all day long between cables and intel and interoffice memos, it's just a deluge of stuff. I didn't read hardly any of that because it didn't help me do my job. I could have literally sat at my terminal all day long reading cables. It's like, who has time for that? The president, when someone is elected president, and I've heard this now from 3 presidents that I knew well personally, President Trump, President Bush 43, and President Bush 41. They believe that the day they stick their hand in the air and take the oath of office, there's a big stopwatch that gets clicked. And every minute that goes by is precious to them because as far as they know, they only have 4 years to do what they want to do. They've worked their asses off. They've raised hundreds of millions, these days billions of dollars in campaign contributions to get to where they are. It's been a life's work in many cases. They don't want to squander 1 second of that time because whether you agree or disagree, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, whether it's Biden or Trump or Obama, they have an agenda. They were elected to see that agenda through. And every minute that goes by that their agenda is not being fulfilled, that the press can't report, President Biden put another notch on the scoreboard or another number on the scoreboard on whatever his agenda is. Same with President Trump, same with President Obama. Every minute that goes by that hasn't occurred, it creates an angst with those people because they don't know if they're going to get reelected again. And they want their legacy to be that they accomplished something. So the more their time is wasted by non-actionable stuff that someone feels like they need to put out with big fancy stripes on the cover is just a waste of time. So to answer your question directly, put out stuff that's useful and stay current on what's useful. What was useful on Monday is not necessarily useful on Tuesday. And the Ukraine situation is a prime example.
Well, Ambassador Sondland, perhaps to some of our students, since we were both had the pleasure and the honor of serving our country as Chief of Missions, ambassadors, just like Chief of Stations, just like the leaders in our intelligence community, we want to serve our nation. We want to do good. And if you're not in it for that reason, you should never do this for a living. So the fundamental aspect of a relationship is trust. And the chief of mission and your intelligence community, yes, organizationally they're different, but they have to trust each other. If they do not trust each other, they will not achieve the best for our country. And that's our obligation. So with that said, Ambassador,
Well said.
I wanted to thank you for a very colorful, personal, and informative presentation.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And please accept our point. Thank you. Thank you.